You want to know about the human? Fine, pour something first. This isn't a short one. My name is Kessie. Back then I was 19 cycles old, 4 arms, scared of everything, and I'd never seen a human in my life. Most of us hadn't. You have to understand, humans were new. Not new like a fresh recruit, new like a rumor. The kind of species the older cadets talked about in the wash bays with their voices low, the way you talk about something you're not sure you believe in. We trained at the threshold. That's what everyone called it. Officially, it had some long coalition designation with numbers in it, but nobody used that. It was a station bored into a dead moon, no atmosphere outside, gravity heavy enough that your second day there your knees ached and your third day you stopped noticing. Cold metal everywhere. The lights had a hum you could feel in your teeth. You woke to that hum and you slept under it. There were maybe 200 of us in that intake. Drennick like me, a cluster of Ceph, some of the tall, pale Miravi who never blinked enough, a few species I couldn't name, and one human. His name was Marsh. I remember the first time I saw him because he was so unremarkable I almost laughed. Humans are small. Did you know that? Smaller than us, soft skin, no plating, no spines, eyes that face forward like a predator's but a body that looks like it'd break if you leaned on it. He stood in the intake line with his hands in his pockets. They have pockets, humans, little pouches sewn into the clothes, and he looked bored. Everyone else in that line was rigid with fear. Marsh looked like he was waiting for a transit shuttle. I thought this one dies first. I want to be clear about that. I'm not proud of it, but I thought it and so did everyone, and we weren't being cruel. We were being accurate. The threshold killed cadets. Not often, not on purpose, but it happened, and when it happened it was usually the small ones, the soft ones, the ones who looked like Marsh. Our instructor was a thresh named Olikvor. If you've never seen a thresh, picture something built out of gray stone and old grudges. Tall, broad, a face that didn't move much. Olikvor had served 40 cycles in the Carrion Wars before they put him here to break children into soldiers, and he carried all 40 of those cycles in the way he walked, slow, like the floor owed him something. He didn't shout. That's what made him frightening. The shouting instructors, you could survive those. They burned themselves out. Olikvor spoke quietly and you leaned in to hear, and that was how he got you. By the time you understood what he'd said, you'd already agreed to do something terrible. On the 9th day, he took us to the pit. The pit was a sealed arena at the bottom of the station, deeper than anything else, the gravity even heavier down there so that just standing was work. The walls were scarred. Old scoring, old burns. Nobody explained the burns and nobody asked. We stood in a ring around the edge of a drop, and below us, behind a barrier of layered, transparent shielding thicker than my body, something moved. I'll try to describe it. I've had years to find the words and I still don't have good ones. It was gray. A wet, sick gray, the color of something that had drowned and come back up. It was big, bigger than Olikvor, low to the ground, too many joints in its legs so that when it walked it seemed to be folding and unfolding at the same time. It had no eyes that I could find. It had a mouth, though. The mouth I remember. It ran most of the length of its head and it didn't close all the way ever, so you could always see the dark inside it working. This, Olikvor said in that quiet voice, is a Greywound. We didn't make a sound. 200 cadets and you could hear the hum of the lights. You will not find it in your records, he went on. The coalition does not publish what it cannot defeat. There are 9 of these creatures in containment across the territories. This is one of them. It was taken 11 cycles ago from a moon we no longer name, after it consumed a research outpost of 400 personnel in a single rotation. He let that sit. 400, he said again. And it was not hungry, it does not hunger. We have never observed it eat. We have only observed it kill. Below us the Greywound turned, slow, and pressed the side of its head against the shielding. Just rested it there, like it could hear us, like it was listening to the sound of 200 young hearts going fast. Olikvor walked the ring. We turned to follow him with our eyes and didn't dare turn with our bodies. You are here, he said, to learn that some things cannot be solved with the weapon in your hand. This is the first lesson and the most expensive. Cadets who do not learn it die learning it later in the field where it costs more than themselves. He stopped. He was standing near Marsh. I remember that. He always seemed to end up near Marsh. Tell me, Cadet, Olekfor said. You have a rifle. What do you do with this creature? Marsh looked down into the pit. He didn't answer right away. He had this thing he did, I'd see it 100 times after that, where he'd go quiet and still, and you could almost watch him taking a thing apart in his head, looking at the pieces. How fast does it heal? Marsh asked. Olekvor's face didn't move, but something behind it did. I think it was the first time a cadet had ever answered his question with a question. Faster than you can fire, he said. How much faster? There is no weapon in this station, Olekfor said slowly, that can kill that creature. Plasma closes the wound as it opens it. Kinetic rounds are pushed out of the tissue within seconds. We have tried fire. We have tried cold. We have tried severing it into pieces, and the pieces crawled back to one another and reattached while our soldiers watched and lost their minds. It does not die. That is the lesson. It does not die, and you cannot make it. The only correct action when you face a Greywound is to seal the door and run. He looked at Marsh when he said it. He was talking to all of us, but he was looking at the human. Do you understand me, Cadet? And Marsh, soft little Marsh, who I'd marked for dead on the first day, said, I understand you. I just don't think you're right. You could have heard a spine plate drop. Olekfor turned fully to face him. Around the ring 200 cadets went very, very still, the way prey goes still, because we all understood that something was about to happen to the human, and none of us wanted it to happen to us by association. You don't think I'm right, Olekfor repeated. You said no weapon can kill it. Marsh wasn't being smug. That's the part nobody believes when I tell this. He wasn't grandstanding. He looked genuinely like he was working through a problem and had hit a part that bothered him. But you've only tried killing it. There's a difference between something you can't kill and something you haven't figured out how to kill yet. Those aren't the same sentence. 40 cycles, Olekfor said. 40 cycles I fought these wars. I have buried more soldiers than your species has been off its homeworld. And you, 9 days into your training, believe you have seen something I have not. No, Marsh said. I believe you stopped looking. That's not the same as it not being there. I want you to understand what kind of thing that was to say. To a thresh. To that thresh. The Seth cadet next to me made a small sound like she was already mourning. Olekfor was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that frightened me more than any shout could have. He smiled. Very well, Olekfor said. He walked to a console at the edge of the ring and put one heavy hand on it. There is a protocol, he said, for cadets who believe they are wiser than the war. It is an old protocol. I have invoked it twice in my time at the threshold. Both cadets are dead. He said it the way you'd report weather. You will go into the pit. You will take any weapon from the armory that you choose. You will have until the shift bell. If you can make that creature stop moving, not flee from it, not survive it, stop it. I will stand before this entire intake and tell them you were right and I was wrong. The whole ring of us had gone cold. And if you cannot, Olekfor said, the shielding lowers at the bell regardless. So I suggest you do not waste the time arguing whether this is fair. I expected Marsh to back down. There's no shame in backing down from that. Any of us would have. All of us would have. The honorable thing, the smart thing, was to say I misspoke and take the humiliation and live. Marsh looked down into the pit at the gray thing, folding and unfolding against the glass. Can I see your kill reports? He asked. Olekfor blinked. What? Every time you tried to kill it, the reports, what you tried, what it did. You said you tried fire, kinetic, plasma, cutting it apart. I want to read all of it. If I've only got till the bell, I'm not going to waste it down there trying things you already know don't work. And there it was again, that thing about humans that I would spend the rest of my life trying to explain to people who hadn't met one. He wasn't braver than us. I've thought about this for years and I'm sure of it now. Marsh was not braver than us. He was afraid. I could see it in the set of his small, soft shoulders. He was just more curious than he was afraid. And those are very different things, and I had never met anyone where the curiosity won. Olekfor stared at him for a long time. "You have until the bell," he said. "Reading is part of the bell." "Then I'd better start reading," Marsh said, and held out his hand for the reports. They gave him the reports. I don't think Olekfor expected him to actually read them. I think he expected Marsh to glance at them, panic, and beg off. Instead, Marsh sat down on the cold floor at the edge of the pit, cross-legged with the data slate in his lap, and he read. Hours. He read for hours. The intake was dismissed, but most of us didn't leave. We couldn't. We drifted to the walls and we watched the human sit there scrolling through 40 cycles of failure with his soft face lit up gray-blue by the slate, occasionally stopping, occasionally going back, occasionally muttering something none of us could hear. Once he laughed, quietly, at something in the reports. I have no idea what. To this day I'd give an arm to know what was funny. I worked up the courage near the end of the shift to go sit near him, not next to him, near him. He noticed and didn't tell me to leave, so I stayed. "You're going to die," I told him. I meant it kindly. I wanted him to know someone had said it out loud. "Probably," Marsh agreed, not looking up. "Hey, can I ask you something? You've been here longer than me. When that thing pushed its head against the glass earlier, did you see what it did right before?" "It moved toward us." "It went still first." He scrolled back through something on the slate. "For about 2 seconds it went completely still. Then it moved. It does it every time. There's a report in here from Cycle 6. A handler noticed it too, wrote it down, and then there's a note from a supervisor telling him it's not relevant." He looked up at me, and his forward-facing predator eyes were bright. "Why would you write down that something isn't relevant? You only do that when it bothered you. When it almost meant something." I didn't have an answer. He wasn't really asking me. He was asking the air. The bell came. We filled the ring again, the whole intake plus instructors who had no reason to be there, except that word had spread and nobody wanted to miss it. Olekfor stood at the console. Marsh stood at the armory rack. "This is the part everyone wants me to get to. The weapon. What did the human take?" He took a kinetic rifle, the most ordinary weapon on the rack. The exact weapon Olekfor had specifically said did not work, that the creature pushed the rounds out of its own flesh within seconds. A murmur went around the ring. Disappointment, almost. We'd wanted him to be clever. We'd wanted some hidden answer. Instead, the human had read for 6 hours and walked up and grabbed the one thing we'd already been told was useless. Olekfor's face was unreadable. "That weapon will not kill it," he said. "I told you that before you wasted your day reading." "I know," Marsh said. He was loading it. His hands were shaking. I could see it from across the ring, the small tremor in those soft fingers, and he loaded it anyway, steady enough, round by round. "You're right. It won't." "Then why?" "Because you've been trying to kill it," Marsh said. "I'm not going to kill it." And he stepped to the edge, and the shielding began to lower, and he dropped down into the pit with the gray thing. I have replayed the next part more times than any other memory I own. The Greywound came at him fast, faster than something that size should move, folding across the floor of the pit. Marsh raised the rifle and fired, and just like the report said, just like Olekfor said, the rounds punched into that gray, wet hide and the hide pushed them back out, the wound sealing, the creature not even slowing. It should have ended there. We all braced for it to end there. But Marsh wasn't aiming for the body. He'd seen something in those 6 hours. He fired 3 rounds in a tight cluster into the floor of the pit, just in front of the creature, and the Greywound stopped. It went still. That 2-second stillness. The thing the handler had written down in Cycle 6 and a supervisor had crossed out as not relevant. It wasn't blind. It didn't have eyes, but it wasn't blind. It felt the floor. It hunted through vibration, through the metal, through the impact of feet and the shudder of movement. And when something hit the ground hard and sudden and wrong, it stopped for 2 seconds to listen, to reread the world, to find out what had changed. Marsh had figured out that the creature you couldn't kill had a moment, every single time, where it had to stop and ask the room a question. And he reloaded into that moment. He didn't try to outshoot it. He played its rhythm. 3 rounds into the floor, the creature froze to listen, and in those 2 seconds Marsh moved, repositioned, fired again to reset the stillness before it could finish the previous one. It never got to finish reading. He kept overriding the question with a new one. Stop. Listen. Stop. Listen. Stop. He walked that monster backward across its own pit 2 seconds at a time. A soft little human with the most ordinary rifle on the rack, herding the unkillable thing into the corner under the discharge vent. And then the part that made even Olakfor take a step forward. Marsh fired his last cluster not at the creature, but at the vent housing above it. The old scoring on those walls. That's what the burns were. Somebody long ago had tried this and gotten close. The vent blew. The pit's heavy gravity dumped the full containment coolant load straight down onto the Greywound, and the creature didn't burn and didn't freeze and didn't die. It stopped, frozen mid-fold, locked in the slurry as it solidified, still listening, still asking the room its question, and the room had finally answered in a language it couldn't push back out of its own flesh. It wasn't dead. Marsh was right about that too. You couldn't kill it. But it had stopped moving, which is exactly, precisely to the word what Olakfor had asked for. The bell hadn't even finished ringing. Marsh stood in the pit with the empty rifle hanging from his shaking hands, looking up at us. He didn't cheer. He didn't grin. He just looked exhausted and a little sick, the way you look after the fear catches up with you all at once. The ring was silent. And then Olakfor, 40 cycles of war, more buried soldiers than my species had years off its homeworld, walked to the edge of the pit, looked down at the soft, small creature who had done the thing he'd called impossible, and did exactly what he'd promised. He turned to the entire intake. "I was wrong," he said. That was all, 4 words. From him, it was the most extraordinary thing I ever heard. They lifted Marsh out. Someone wrapped a thermal sheet around his shoulders. He was still shaking. As they walked him past me, he caught my eye and he said, "I swear this is what he said. After all of that," he said. "It wasn't a weapon problem. It was a listening problem. We just kept talking louder." I served 11 cycles after the threshold. I saw real war, not the practice kind. I saw a lot of soldiers and a lot of weapons and a lot of things the records say can't be beaten. And every time someone tells me a thing is impossible, every single time, I think about a soft little human sitting, cross-legged on a cold floor for 6 hours, reading every reason it couldn't be done, looking for the one note somebody else had crossed out. The galaxy spent 11 cycles trying to kill that creature with everything it had. The human didn't bring a bigger weapon. He just refused to stop asking the question after everyone else had agreed on the answer. They handed him the reports the way you hand a condemned soldier his last meal. Olakfor passed the data slate down without a word, and I watched the human take it in both of his small hands, and I thought, that's it. That's the last decision he gets to make, and he's spending it on reading. Most of the intake drifted off after that. They'd been dismissed. A challenge in the pit was a serious thing, but serious things still ran on the shift clock, and there were drills and rations and sleep rotations that didn't care that a human was about to die. So they went. I want to be honest with you, I almost went too. There's a part of every soldier that doesn't want to watch the thing it can't stop. But I didn't go. A handful of us didn't. We pressed ourselves against the cold curve of the wall on the far side of the ring, and we watched Marsh sit down. He didn't sit like a cadet. Cadets sit at attention even when they're resting. It gets beaten into you in the first 3 days. Marsh just folded his soft legs under him on the floor, set the slate in his lap, and hunched over it like a child over a puzzle. The gray-blue light of the screen lit the underside of his face. Below him, behind the shielding, the Greywound moved in its slow, folding way, and Marsh didn't look at it. Not once those first hours. He looked at the reports. I've thought a great deal about what that took. Not the courage, the patience. The creature was right there. Every instinct any of us had screamed to watch it, to keep eyes on the threat, to never turn your back on the thing in the pit. And Marsh turned his whole attention away from it and gave that attention to paper, to 40 cycles of other people's failures, because he had decided, in that cold way he had, that the answer was more likely to be in the reports than in his fear. I'll tell you what the reports were, because I asked him later and he told me, and I've never forgotten it. They were a graveyard, cycle after cycle of attempts. Some were experiments, handlers and weapons specialists trying, in controlled conditions, to find a way to put the Greywound down. Some were accidents, a containment breach in Cycle 3, a handler who fell into the pit in Cycle 7 and lasted 11 seconds. The reports recorded all of it in that flat military language that makes horror sound like inventory. Plasma discharge sustained 4 seconds. Wound cauterization observed concurrent with wound formation. No net tissue loss. Specimen unaffected. Kinetic barrage 300 rounds. Penetration confirmed. Rounds expelled from tissue within 4 to 9 seconds via muscular action. No net damage. Specimen unaffected. Cryogenic immersion partial. Specimen motility reduced for 11 seconds. Specimen recovered full motility. No net damage. Over and over. Specimen unaffected. Specimen unaffected. You could feel the people behind the reports slowly losing hope, cycle by cycle, the language getting shorter, the experiments getting rarer, until somewhere around cycle 9 they just stopped trying. The last few entries weren't experiments at all. They were maintenance logs. They'd given up on killing it and settled for keeping it fed and contained. The coalition had looked at the Greywound and decided the only victory available was don't let it out. And buried in the middle of all that, Cycle 6, was the note. Marsh found it because he read everything, even the parts marked irrelevant, especially the parts marked irrelevant. A handler named Pell had written a short observation log, nothing dramatic. Pell had noticed that when he dropped a heavy tool near the containment glass, the Greywound stopped, just for a moment, went rigid, head tilted, the long mouth gone still, and then resumed. Pell had done it a few more times to be sure. Same result every time. A hard, sudden impact on the floor, and the creature froze for about 2 seconds before it moved again. Pell had written it up and flagged it for review, and a supervisor had written underneath in the clipped tone of someone with too much to do, noted, not relevant to containment, no further action. That was the sentence that killed the Greywound. Not relevant, a note crossing out a note. Marsh sat on that cold floor and read 4 words written by a tired supervisor 11 cycles ago, and his whole body changed. I saw it. He went very still, the way he did when he was taking something apart in his head. Then he scrolled back and read Pell's observation again, and he laughed, that quiet laugh I told you about, the one I'd give an arm to understand. Now I think I do understand it a little. I think he laughed because the answer had been sitting in the file for 11 cycles, written down by a man who'd seen it clearly, and then dismissed by a man who hadn't been looking for it. I think Marsh laughed at how close everyone had already come. That was when I worked up the nerve to go sit near him. I've told this part before. You're going to die, I said to him, and I meant it kindly, the way you'd warn someone the floor was wet. And he said, probably without looking up, and then he asked me about the stillness, whether I'd seen the creature go rigid before it moved at the glass. I hadn't really seen it, but once he said it I realized I had seen it, I just hadn't noticed it. There's a difference. The whole arena had watched that thing for 9 days and we'd all seen it and none of us had noticed it, because we were watching it the way you watch a predator, looking for the lunge, the attack, the danger. Marsh watched it the way you watch a machine, looking for the pattern, looking for the part that repeated. It hunts through the floor, he said to me quietly, almost to himself. It doesn't have eyes. Everyone keeps writing no visual organs like it's a weakness. It's not a weakness. It feels the ground. Footsteps movement, the shudder of mass moving through metal. That's how it found the handler in cycle 7 so fast the man fell. Big impact. It went straight to him. Then how do you hide from it, I asked, if it feels everything? And he looked at me with those bright forward-facing eyes, and he said the thing that I have carried with me through 11 cycles of war. You don't hide, you can't hide, you're standing on its sense organ, but here's the thing. He tapped the slate. When it gets something it doesn't expect, a hard, wrong impact out of rhythm, it stops. It has to stop. It rereads the room. For 2 seconds it's not hunting, it's listening, it's asking the floor a question. And a thing that has to stop and ask a question, he said, is a thing with a gap in it. You don't fight the monster, you fight the gap. The shift was nearly over. The bell was coming. I remember the cold of the floor coming up through me, and the gray thing folding in the pit below, and this soft, small creature beside me who had decided that the way to beat the unkillable was to find its 2 quiet seconds and live inside them. The bell came, and the ring filled again. I told you word had spread. By the time the bell rang, the ring around the pit was 3 deep. The whole intake came back. Instructors who had no business being there leaned against the rails. Even some of the station handlers, the ones who tended the creature, drifted in at the edges with their arms crossed, because a challenge in the pit hadn't been invoked in cycles, and certainly never by a human, and certainly never against the Greywound. Everyone there believed they had come to watch a death. You could feel it in the room, not bloodlust, nothing so simple. Just the heavy, quiet attention people give to something terrible they can't look away from. Vor stood at the console. Marsh stood at the armory rack. This is the moment everyone wants. What did the human take? I've had soldiers grab my arm at this part of the telling, leaning in, certain there's some secret weapon coming, some forbidden thing off the back of the rack. He took a kinetic rifle. The plainest weapon there. The standard-issue cadet rifle, the same one we'd all carried since day one, the exact weapon the reports had recorded failing 300 rounds at a time. Rounds expelled from tissue within 4 to 9 seconds. No net damage. He walked past the plasma lances and the cryo-throwers and the heavy ordnance, and he picked up the most ordinary rifle in the room. A sound went through the ring, not quite a groan, disappointment almost. We'd wanted him to be clever in a way we could see. We'd wanted the secret weapon. Instead, he'd read for 6 hours and come back with the thing we'd all already been told was useless. Vor watched him load it. That weapon will not kill it, he said, quiet the way he was always quiet. I told you this before you wasted your day on the reports. 300 rounds did nothing. Yours will do less. You're right, Marsh said. He was loading it round by round, and I could see the tremor in his soft hands from across the ring, and he loaded it anyway, steady enough. It won't kill it. I'm not going to kill it. Then explain to me, Vor said, and for the first time there was something almost like curiosity under the stone of his voice. What you imagine you are about to do. Marsh seeded the last round. He looked up at the instructor. You've all been trying to win the fight, he said. I'm going to win the 2 seconds. And he stepped to the edge, and the shielding began to lower with that deep grinding hum. And the human dropped down into the pit, with the thing that could not be killed. I have replayed what happened next more times than any other memory I own, and I'm going to give it to you as slowly as I lived it, because living it was not slow at all. The Greywound came at him fast. I told you it was big and low and folded when it moved. What I didn't tell you is how wrong it looked in motion when there was prey in the pit with it. With us safe behind the glass, it had moved lazily, almost idly. Now there was warm, soft mass on its floor, and it came across that floor like gray water rushing downhill, joints unfolding, the long mouth working, and it covered the distance so fast that half the ring cried out, certain it was already over. Marsh raised the rifle and fired. The rounds hit. You could see them hit small dark impacts punching into that wet gray hide, and you could see, exactly as the reports promised, the hide push them back out, the muscle working in obscene ripples, the wounds closing as fast as they opened. The creature didn't slow, didn't flinch, took every round and kept coming, and a sick certainty went through all of us. He wasted his 6 hours. The reports were right. The instructor was right. The human read for a day and learned nothing. But Marsh wasn't aiming for the creature. His last shots in that first burst went low and wide. 3 rounds in a tight cluster slammed into the metal floor of the pit, directly in the creature's path. And the Greywound stopped. It went rigid, mid-fold, mid-rush, the whole gray mass of it locking still, the long mouth frozen, the head tilting a fraction of a degree. For 2 seconds it was a statue. The thing that ate 400 people in a rotation, the thing the coalition couldn't kill, stood absolutely still in the middle of its own pit because something had struck the floor hard and wrong and out of rhythm, and it had to know what. Pell's 2 seconds. The note a tired man had crossed out 11 cycles ago. And in those 2 seconds Marsh moved. He didn't run. There was nowhere to run. The pit was sealed. He repositioned 3 quick steps to the side and back, and the instant the creature began to come out of its stillness, the instant it resolved its question and started to turn toward the new sound of his feet, he fired another cluster into the floor. And it stopped again. I understood it then, all of us did, the whole ring leaning in as one body. He wasn't trying to hurt it. He'd known the rifle couldn't hurt it. He was using the rifle as a voice. 3 rounds into the floor was a question the creature couldn't ignore, a hard, wrong impact that overrode whatever it had been doing and forced it to stop and reread the room. And before it could finish rereading, before its 2 seconds were up, Marsh asked it a new question. Another cluster. Another stop. He kept overwriting the question. The creature never got to finish a single thought. Stop. Listen. Stop. Listen. Stop. He walked it backward. A soft little human with the plainest rifle on the rack, 2 seconds at a time, herded the unkillable thing across its own pit. Every time it tried to come for him, he interrupted it. And a creature that has to stop and listen is a creature that cannot also lunge, and he had found the one gap in a thing that had no other weakness in the galaxy. He drove it back and back, step by frozen step, into the corner of the pit beneath the heavy bulk of the discharge vent. He was rationing his rounds. I realized that watching him, he was counting. He had a finite magazine and an infinite monster, and he was spending each round like it was the last warmth in a cold place, only firing when the creature's 2 seconds were nearly up, never wasting a question, threading it as fine as he could. And those scars on the walls, the old burns nobody had explained. I understood those too in that moment, and so did Oleg Vor, because I saw the instructor take a single step forward toward the rail with an expression I would not have believed his stone face could make. Someone had done this before, long ago. Someone had figured out the 2 seconds and herded the creature to this exact corner and gotten close enough to scar the walls, and then run out of rounds, or run out of nerve, or run out of time, and died with the answer almost in their hands. The pit remembered. The pit had been waiting 11 cycles for someone to finish the sentence. Marsh backed the creature under the vent. He had, I learned later, he'd counted it exactly, 3 rounds left. He didn't fire them at the Greywound. He turned the rifle up and put his last 3 rounds into the vent, housing above the creature's head. The old containment system had not been designed to be fired at. The housing gave, and the pit's heavy gravity, that terrible weight that made just standing down there a labor, took the full coolant load of the containment array and dumped it straight down, all of it, onto the gray thing in the corner. It didn't burn the creature. It didn't freeze it, not the way cold had failed before. The reports were right. You could not kill the Greywound with heat or cold or force. The coolant didn't kill it. It said. It came down as slurry, and it hit the floor and the walls and the creature. And in the heavy cold of the pit it began, fast, to solidify. And the Greywound, in the half-second the deluge hit it, did the only thing it ever did when struck by something hard and wrong and unexpected. It stopped to listen, to ask the room its question. And it asked the question one time too many. It held still, 2 seconds of stillness, the same 2 seconds it had given Pell and given the dead handler and given the scars on the wall. And in those 2 seconds the slurry locked around it and hardened, and the creature that could not be killed was frozen mid-fold inside it. Head tilted, mouth open, still listening, caught forever in the act of trying to understand what had finally happened to it. It wasn't dead. Marsh had been right about that from the first day against 40 cycles of certainty. You could not kill it. It was alive in there, I'm sure it's alive in there still. But it had stopped moving. Which was, to the exact word, precisely what Olekvor had asked for. The bell hadn't even finished ringing. He'd beaten the clock with time to spare. Marsh stood in the corner of the pit with the empty rifle hanging from his shaking hands, looking up at the ring of us. The set creature loomed over him, gray and frozen and enormous, and he stood there in its shadow looking very small and very tired and a little sick. The way you look when the fear you held off for 6 hours finally arrives all at once and collects what it's owed. Nobody cheered. I want you to understand that. 300 of us packed around that rail and not one made a sound because what we had watched wasn't the kind of thing you cheer. It was too large for that. We had been told, all of us, by people we trusted, by people who had earned the right to be believed, that a thing was impossible. And we had watched a soft little creature with the plainest weapon in the room make it possible, not with strength, not with a better gun, but by refusing to stop asking the question after everyone else had agreed on the answer. The silence held. And then Olekvor moved. He walked to the edge of the pit, 40 cycles of war in the slow weight of his step. He looked down at Marsh and down at the frozen creature for a long moment. Then he straightened, and he turned to face the entire intake, 300 cadets and instructors and handlers, and he did exactly what he had promised he would do. I was wrong, he said. 4 words. I told you before from that mouth after 40 cycles, it was the most extraordinary thing I ever heard. He didn't soften it. He didn't explain it away or wrap it in conditions. He stood in front of every soldier he was responsible for breaking, and he said the thing instructors are taught never to say, the thing soldiers are taught to fear more than the enemy, and he said it plainly because it was true and because the human had earned it. They lowered a lift and brought Marsh up out of the pit. Someone wrapped a thermal sheet around his shoulders. He was shivering hard now, the cold and the fear both catching up. The handlers were already moving, calling for containment teams, because a set creature in a breached pit was its own kind of emergency. But for a moment, just a moment, none of that mattered. For a moment the whole arena simply looked at the human. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like he wanted to lie down. As they walked him past me, thermal sheet around his shoulders, hands still trembling, he caught my eye, and I swear to you this is what he said after all of it. It wasn't a weapon problem, he said. It was a listening problem. We just kept talking louder. I asked him about it later, when his hands had stopped shaking, and we were eating cold rations in the wash bay with the lights humming over us. I asked him if he'd been sure, if he'd known, sitting on that floor reading, that the 2 seconds would be enough. No, he said. I wasn't sure of anything. Pell's note could have been wrong. The supervisor could have been right that it didn't matter. The vent might not have blown. The coolant might not have set fast enough. He turned a ration cube over in his fingers. I wasn't sure. I just couldn't find the part of the file that said it was impossible. Everyone said impossible. Nobody had written down the experiment where they tried the 2 seconds and it failed. They tried everything else. They never tried that. He shrugged, a small, soft motion. If nobody's ever tried the thing, then nobody actually knows it can't be done. They just believe it can't. Those aren't the same sentence. Those aren't the same sentence. He said it the same way he'd said it to Olukvor on the 9th day. I think it was the truest thing about him. The whole galaxy had a list of impossible things, and Marsh's entire method, his entire self, was the stubborn refusal to confuse. We have decided this is impossible with we have proven this is impossible. He went and looked every time in the place where everyone else had stopped looking. Most of the time, I imagine, he found nothing. But some of the time it mattered, the time 300 of us were watching. He found a note a tired man had crossed out 11 cycles ago, and he made the impossible thing stop moving. I served 11 cycles after the threshold. I saw real war, not the practice kind, the kind where the things in the pit don't stay in the pit, where the reports are written about people you ate rations with. I saw a great many soldiers and a great many weapons and a great many things the records swore could not be beaten. And every time someone tells me a thing is impossible, every single time, across all those cycles, I think about a soft little human sitting, cross-legged on a cold floor for 6 hours, reading every reason it couldn't be done, looking past every one of them for the single note somebody else had crossed out. The galaxy spent 11 cycles trying to kill that creature with everything it had. Plasma, fire, cold, 300 rounds at a time. The human didn't bring a bigger weapon. He brought the smallest one in the room. He just refused to stop asking the question after everyone else had agreed on the answer. And he listened, in the 2 seconds where the monster had to listen too. That's the whole story. That's why I still tell it. Pour something else. I'll tell you what happened to Olukvor after.